Welcome to the Clarinet Podcast, the show about all that's new and neat with clarinet, with the neatest people in the industry. You can support the ongoing production of this independently produced program by donating to our Patreon at clarinet.com/support. Supporters get early access to extended ad-free podcasts and exclusive access to patron-only episodes and live events. And now for today's episode of the podcast, a special 90th birthday celebration for none other than Stanley Drucker.
Everything is individual. Everybody has their own idea of what sounds good, and you have to develop your own taste as to whether it satisfies or not, or it says what you want it to say. Artistically, you have to have an idea.
Welcome to the Clarinet Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Perrin. Today on the show, Stanley Drucker, who of course was the New York Philharmonic's principal clarinetist for many years and who played in the orchestra for over 60 years total, joins me for a special 90th birthday celebration. If you're listening to this episode on the day of its release, this day, February 4th, 2019, is actually Stanley's 90th birthday, and he should be having a nice party in New York there with some of his closest family and colleagues. In this Q&A style episode today, we discuss practice and performance techniques, what it was like working with Leonard Bernstein, Glenn Gould, and other major artists, how it felt winning a Guinness World Record for longest orchestral career as a clarinetist, how Stanley never cracked a clarinet in over 60 years, amazingly, and much more. Thank you so much to listeners all around the world for sending in questions, and to Jerry Bunke for proposing this great idea. Speaking of Jerry Bunke, he is also providing special access to great pricing on the 5-disc Heritage Collection set that Stanley Drucker mentions in the previous episode of the podcast, and which I hope to also delve into more on future episodes of the show with Stanley. Oh, and did I mention that each copy will be signed? So this is a great chance to not only get fantastic pricing on this 5-CD set, but also obtain a signed copy and help support Stanley's legacy into the future. Speaking of Stanley's legacy, I was trying to think of a way that I could help directly support the birthday celebrations in New York there. And you know, I don't actually live in New York, and I don't really want to do something like send a clarinet cake or something ridiculous like that. So what I decided to do, actually, in addition to producing this podcast on a whole, is release the lightning round portion public to the clarinet community all over the world. I think that will be just a great way to help Stanley's legacy reach as many people as possible. You know, if you do enjoy this lightning round portion, just keep in mind that this is normally private for the Patreon backers only, and you can get access to this for as little as $1 a month. So I do feel that I want to provide the best value possible, but I also need help producing this show on a monthly basis. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and there's a lot of cost behind the scenes. So if you do appreciate the content, you want to see more of it, please consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. And this is a month where we've actually sustained 40 backers for the whole month. So starting in February here, we're going to have the first ever live event with a special guest who I'll be announcing very soon. So don't miss out. Get a chance to participate in not only this live event, but hear the bonus content every single episode. And also the Patreon episodes are ad-free, so check it out. Learn more. It's only $1 a month. I know that strangely enough, in the world of $5 lattes, $1 is actually a big bridge to cross. So I really appreciate the fact that 40 people are taking the time not only to support the show, but to provide me with some of their hard-earned income and let this show be possible into the future. So thank you so much to the Patreon community for your support and for making the show possible. And thank you also to the support of our generous sponsors. And we'll get to today's episode right after these short messages. Join renowned clarinetist David Schifrin at the International Clarinet Celebration in beautiful Portland, Oregon, June 24th to 30th. Hosted by Chamber Music Northwest, this event combines a full week of concerts by world-class artists like Corrado Giuffretti and Jose Frank Ballester. There's also clarinet masterclasses, lectures, clarinet mentors amateur workshops, ensemble performance opportunities, a clarinet marketplace, and a young artist competition. Passes are on sale now, and you can learn more at cmnw.org. D'Addario Woodwinds has an exciting new weekly trivia show called Don't Blow It. You can check it out every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on their Instagram channel. And if you know the right answers to the questions, you might even have the chance to win some amazing new gear. By the way, if you haven't had a chance to try D'Addario's new reserve clarinet reeds, you're in for a real treat. They're using some really amazing new technology and manufacturing techniques that are helping achieve super consistent results. You can pick up a box at your local music store or head to clarinet.com/reeds to buy a box right now. Hosting for Clarinet is sponsored by Bakun and their new line of Lumiere clarinets, barrels, and bells. Get 10% off your next accessory purchase by using code Clarinet at bakunmusical.com. So I'm here again with Stanley Drucker. Stanley, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again.
Well, it's a pleasure, Sean.
So, of course, you're returning here today is in celebration of your 90th birthday. So, I want to start off and just say a happy birthday from the entire clarinet community and especially from the clarinet community.
Well, thank you very much. It's awesome.
Any special plans for your birthday there in the city, or?
I guess we'll have a little party. Our daughter and our son also, and spouses will come up from to New York from California, where everybody seems to live these days.
So, if you have any clarinet music going on at your party there, or clarinet cake, or anything fun like that?
Well, I'm just curious to see what evolves.
Yeah. So we've got some listener questions today from all around the world. People were so kind in sending these in, and I want to thank everybody for submitting all of your questions for Stanley here. So the first one is from Ron S., and he says, Stanley, you have such a great sound. I love to listen to you. Do you use double tonguing or just single tonguing?
I use single tonguing. It seemed, when I was a student, only the double reed instruments seemed to double tongue. I guess, oboes, flutes did the double tonguing, but not clarinet. There were very few people that did that.
So that's interesting to me. What's your strategy for getting a great single tongue technique then?
Well, I guess you have to keep practicing and learn the different articulations for the short notes. Sometimes they have to be very light so they can move faster, and sometimes they have to be very very individual in the shortness. Because there's not just one short note. There's so many ways of playing different kinds of short notes.
How did you work to get your tonguing so fast?
I guess I was always looking back and making sure nobody was catching me.
So the next question is from Erin O., and she says, what was your practice routine like before you won your first job, and how did it change over the years?
Well, I would say that when I was a young student practicing or playing, or however you want to call it, I would just play as many pages of everything as I could, and just didn't stop and say, I'm going to do this thing, this two measures, many times when it wasn't necessary to do that. And I think perhaps I played everything a little too fast, maybe, as young people do. But as long as you play often, that's the main thing. And the idea is to learn a repertoire, not just to play the same exercises all the time, because repetition is great, but if nothing changes with repetition, it seems to be a little futile. One has to find a change of some kind, an improvement of some kind, to warrant constant repetition.
I want to just unpack something you said there a little bit. You mentioned, or you implied, that you sort of don't draw a distinction between practicing and playing. Are they one and the same to you?
Absolutely. I've said this to many people. If you're playing a concert, no matter how important or unimportant it is, learn that music. Learn that music. That's what you have to strive for.
Yeah, the music should be the same at home when your practice room is on stage. So why not just treat it all the same?
Right, but you have to play that music. You see, you can't say, I'm going to play a Rose study and then go out 3 days later and play in a concert where you have to play actual pieces.
I love that. So when you get to a concert, what does your ideal warm-up routine look like?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure your reed works. That's probably very important. And the ability to be flexible and to know what you can do with a given reed.
Absolutely. And then so how do you get your fingers and your tongue and all that going? Maybe scales or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. Scales are very important. Scales, chords, thirds are very important. That kind of thing. But also the articulation is very important because very often it's very easy just to play everything, legato or everything detached, but it's the actual markings of music where you might have one short note and three long ones, or three slurred notes, or any combination thereof. You want to really get the articulation of the music down and really have an interesting result.
Do you think about warming up each element of your playing separately, like the blowing and then the tonguing and then the fingers, or do you kind of incorporate them all at the same time?
Well, it depends. It depends. Sometimes you have a lot of time to really warm up, if you want, as a term used, and sometimes you don't have that much time. So I say if you're at a school concert or whatever, or a professional concert or whatever, you want to make sure that you can make the sound properly. So you may have to do it quicker, and you might not have the luxury of a specific longer time to get ready. But you have to know the music you're going to play, and that's probably the biggest preparation.
I'm going to assume that you normally would warm up at the venue, or did you ever warm up before commuting into town?
No. At the venue. It's because every place you play in is a little different. If you play in a large hall or in a small chamber hall or in a place that looks like it's got good acoustics and it's as dead as a doornail, that has an effect also. You're pleased. Most people are pleased when they have a hall that gives them a little bit of feedback, and you have something to play against. The hall helps. There's no question about it.
I've kind of an unrelated question, but it just came to mind as something that I would be very interested in. So in this day and age, I know a lot of people who advocate recording yourself at a distance when you're playing so that you can listen to what you sound like. What was it like practicing and being a student before these kind of technologies were readily available?
Well, it's very difficult to know how it's heard way back in a room, whatever kind of room you're playing in. That's kind of hard to do, but you have to hear everything within yourself, and the dynamics are very important. Soft playing should have as much presence as loud, and you have to play really to feel that whatever you're saying musically can get to the end of a room or hall, no matter how soft it could be. The loud is probably easier. And the danger with that is that you end up playing everything at the same level, and it's not good enough.
So you want to keep up that intensity even on the soft notes.
Well, the soft has, Tabuto used to say, soft has to sound as good as loud.
Last time we talked, you said something about how you can't play a wrong note, but maybe you can play a wrong style. And that started making me think about how can we inject our own personality and an artistic vision, but yet maintain that stylistic integrity?
Well, everything is individual. Everybody has their own idea of what sounds good, and you have to develop your own taste as to whether it satisfies or not, or it says what you want it to say. Because you can hear a familiar piece played by 6 different people, and there will be a lot of differences. So you have to artistically you have to have an idea, and just to say I'm going to do this like this person or that person doesn't always work for you. I mean, you have to try to satisfy yourself. Nobody is ever fully satisfied, but you have to reach a certain level of performance where you feel you've been honest with composer's wishes.
So is what you're sort of saying that if we have an artistic vision, we can actually be responsible for creating a new style?
Well, the thing is, it depends on what you're playing and where. And now, orchestrally, you have to adhere to certain standards or certain methods where you have to be part of a large palette, and you have to satisfy whoever is conducting, and you have to play in context, always with the people around you. Many times you enhance somebody, and other times they have to enhance you. playing artistically on an instrument is a total picture. It's not just one item.
So what do you think of artists like Glenn Gould then, who famously, in playing, the quote wrong style, kind of created their own niche in that way?
Oh, he was certainly a unique individual and very artistic in his approach. I know that he was a little radical with some of the tempos of pieces that people were used to hearing a certain way, but then again, his approach to Bach was very unique. If you listen to that, some of his recordings of Bach, you see that there was a certain kind of a drive that was different than anybody else's.
It's funny with him. At the end of his career, he was becoming a conductor, and it's a shame that he died when he did, because I would have loved to see how he worked with a lot more orchestral repertoire in that same way.
Right. I know he was a soloist with us at the Philharmonic many times, and he had very strong ideas about tempo and style, if you want to use that word, but certainly valid, very valid, because there isn't just one way to do something, and he really made a statement. Though one didn't have to agree with his tempos in works they've heard many times, he seemed to favor in certain works a very slow tempo, very slow. So it depends. People rethink familiar music all the time, I guess.
Is there any particular moment from working with Glenn Gould that you remember?
Well, I remember the famous concert of the Brahms' first piano concerto with Bernstein. I think Lenny, after one of the movements, turned around and spoke to the audience. I think that's even available on tape, where he said, "Mr. Gould is a wonderful artist, but I take no responsibility for this performance, and he has his ideas, and he was not happy with his approach to that piece. But I thought the performance was very interesting. I thought it was great, as it would be, from a professional standpoint.
Yeah, I think I've read about that. I studied Glenn Gould extensively, and it's really amazing to hear that you were there for that moment.
Yes, well, I was there for a lot of moments, sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, many moments, more than I can imagine. The next question is actually about the many moments that you had with the orchestra. So Catherine P. asks, and I've expanded on it a little bit, but you played over 10,000 concerts with the New York Phil, and you actually have a Guinness World Record for the longest career as a clarinettist. And so she says, I'm sure many pieces were repeated dozens and maybe hundreds of times, like the Nutcracker. What is the piece that no matter how many times you play it, you're always glad to play it again?
When I was young, I mean, the familiar pieces, the ones with the important solos, or the interesting lines, one looked forward to those, and I would say that you do get to play a lot of pieces many times. I think of a period of time when it felt as if we were playing the Beethoven Seventh Symphony every week, and people were getting a little tired of it.
What advice do you have for playing pieces again and again like that?
Well, you have to make them fresh. You have to play them as if it's the first time. And the great works are the great works. I mean, that's the permanent collection in any artistic organization. And you look forward to them, and they come back often, and with different conductors. A different approach comes with them also, and it's very interesting how different they can sound depending on who was directing.
What is the piece you think you played the most?
The most? Oh my goodness, that'd be a tough one. But of course, the standard collection was played a lot. It had to be, because the audiences all over the world, they want to hear these premier works. Sometimes certain conductors favored certain types of music or certain composers, and so you really got to have a real insight into some of these works that you hear often.
Do you think it would be something though? Do you guys do big runs of the Nutcracker every single year, or is that to the ballet?
Well, no, that's more the ballet does that. A colleague at the ballet told me he was before the holiday season started that he was looking forward to the 22 performances of Nutcracker.
Yeah, I guess you do that 22 times though for 40 years. That's a lot of performances.
That is. Oh, yes.
So, which is the piece you love to play again and again?
Well, I would say the Mahler symphonies for one. I love to play those. The big clarinet pieces, Rachmaninoff, Second Symphony, Scheherazade, Capriccio Espagnol. There are so many that I'm leaving out many. But I always enjoyed looking forward to those kind of pieces, and we were lucky here in New York that we played such a wide repertoire, and with all the guest conductors that came with the music they loved, and you got to really learn a lot, because we just didn't play one work of a composer. We played a whole bunch of works by that same composer.
And of course, premiered so many too, and recorded premieres too of so many.
Oh, there was a period of time when we were recording almost every day. Just everything was recorded.
So you're going to think this next question is kind of silly, I'm worried, but...
I don't play the drum.
You don't play the drum.
That wasn't the question, was it?
That's my next question. But it's not every day I get to talk to a Guinness World Record holder. So when you were awarded that, like, did they send anything? Do they make any fanfare about it, or is it just?
It's fun. That's what I can say. Number one, it's fun. I mean, at my final solo concert at the Philharmonic, the Copeland Concerto, when they came out and they showed this film that they had made, I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. So I was really moved by some of it, and I couldn't believe some of it. And one of the presentations was from the Guinness Book people. They had a framed plaque with what the citation was, and they just handed to me during the intermission on stage after they did a film, a presentation. They had a fantastic exhibit in the lobby of the concert hall, going back to my start, and I was presented also with the honorary membership in the Philharmonic Society, which was a very moving moment for me. I think I might have gotten very emotional at that point. And the city of New York had a citation involving me, and there were a couple of other things. So it was really a very moving time for me to be, because I didn't expect all of that to happen at that time.
That sounds like an amazing event.
Well, I'll never forget it. I can put it that way. Marvelous time.
So I'm going to skip back to a question from Erin O. She says, I would like to know if there was ever a time in your life where you felt that you were in a rut and not growing at all musically. And if so, how you got out of it? And if not, what would be your advice for someone struggling in that situation?
Well, you musicians or any artists, I think we're emotional people, and we have our highs and lows. So there are frustrations. You opened a couple of boxes of reeds and didn't find one that could satisfy you, or fix one to make it satisfy you. There were times when the schedule was very heavy and there wasn't a free day for God knows how many weeks, and it was a lot of tension where certain works came along that were very difficult and had to be it had to be done along with the stuff that was familiar, and it's an all-consuming situation. Especially if you're in the performing world, there are many moments where you do get uptight in a way. I would assume the main thing is consistency and having your eye on the ball. I've had some exciting moments, I must say, where I had to jump in at the last minute with stuff I hadn't even played yet. Playing for a sick colleague sometimes, or or a soloist that didn't show up and had to do a concerto or things like that. There were moments like this.
That sounds terrifying. Doing a concerto just cold like that?
There was this, we play 4 concerts a week, and at the 4th concert, this famous singer, Jesse Norman, got the flu, and when I got to the hall, there was a message to call the manager, and he said the Jesse Norman is sick, and Zubin asked if he would play the Mozart concerto, and this was an hour before the concert. And of course, no chance to rehearse or anything. But things like that. I jumped in once for a colleague that wasn't there when I was supposed to be off that piece. It was the violin concerto of Shostakovich, and it's quite a part. And I hadn't played the piece in many years. I had to jump in on that. I had to jump in on a modern work once. Jumping in there's no time to get nervous. That's the whole point. You just jump in and let it roll.
I was just about to ask how you don't get nervous in those moments, but I guess you just focus on the goal and.
Well, there's no time to get nervous in a certain way. It's if you're hanging around waiting for something, maybe. I would say I've had a lot of high points. Waiting to go out and play that Corigliano concerto the very first time. That was an exciting moment for me, because it starts with a zillion notes, and coming out of the ether at a very soft situation. I would say I found out I had pretty good nerves anyway, if nothing else.
Yeah. Well, to what extent, though, do you think that's a level of preparation, and to what extent do you think that it's sort of just your nature?
Well, the thing is, when you play every day, you're in a groove. If you have to play many concerts or many rehearsals and you play every day, it's a big help. It's probably harder if you lay off and you're playing one concert a month or something,
Yeah, no, and that's what's hard I find about being a sub locally is I'll sometimes get a call and you're expected to just drop in and go, and that's very hard.
Right, and it's also I think it's important to play a lot of chamber music is very important to play, because there you're actually you're playing with small groups where everybody has their input, and that's important. It's also important to play recitals if you can, and to have people hear you and review you, because it's very easy to do a lot of playing where nobody says a word about what you did. It's important to be heard and to be critiqued.
Absolutely. And, I think it's important, too, to get critiques from people that you don't know. I mean, there's a podcast coach that I know, and he tells you that he's going to be such valuable feedback because he's not your mom.
Well, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of fine players that never do that. In the old days, before my time, there were very few clarinet recitals per se, and certainly fewer recordings. You said people would say this player is great, and it probably was, but nobody ever heard them. They were in a small city, or they were where they never went out on a small stage to play, where somebody could write about it.
Speaking of players, this is a question from Bob M. And he says, which clarinetist today do you most enjoy listening to?
Oh, I like a lot of the players today. I think in the major places, the ones we hear, we don't hear everybody in a small town or the university per se. But I think the clarinet playing I hear in Boston and in Philadelphia and Cleveland, and in New York, it's very fine playing, very high level and focused playing, and I praise them all.
Which soloists do you enjoy the most?
Well, soloists they're more rare. There's so few clarinet soloists because it's very hard to make a living just going around with a clarinet case around the world. It's not like a fiddle or a cello but there are wonderful players everywhere, and they're not just in the big cities.
Oh yeah, everywhere, the whole world now. Speaking of the whole world, there was a question, and I forgot to write down the name of this person. I'm really sorry. But it was about how do you think that clarinetists all around the world, especially those in developing countries, can work towards trying to not only get instruments and training, but also build orchestras locally.
Well, building an orchestra that's a tough. You have to have help and you have to have funds and so forth. But I think no matter where a person came from, there are places to go to study with fine teachers because the playing today is international. It's not so national as it used to be, and the instruments are made so well today. I remember as a little kid. Instruments were not as good, and everybody had to travel with 4 different barrels all the time to try to get in tune. Where that doesn't happen anymore today, they're made so well, and the world is with the information that you get everywhere. They hear everybody, and they certainly can get opinions formed by hearing. These fine players, it doesn't matter where they come from. They seems to be an international level. Of course, the big talents, the great talents, are just as few as they were in my time, my youth. So maybe there are more players, but I don't know if you could say there are more great ones. I don't know. I would say there are a lot of good players around.
Well, of course, now with the internet, too, almost anywhere in the world, you could study with almost whoever you want if you really tried.
That's right. There has to, it's always good to get ideas from people. And it doesn't only have to be on the instrument you play. You could get ideas from any instrumentalist that has some kind of fantasy in their soul where they can make a beautiful phrase.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the clarinets have improved a lot. What has been your favorite improvement? Was it intonation or something more technical?
Of course, I would say they can't improve the wood. That's one thing. The wood is the wood if you're using a wooden instrument. But I would say that the modern design of instruments, the intonation is excellent on the instruments. There's a lot of care. Mechanically, there's sound. They are definitely, the woodwind instruments are definitely excellent today.
Did you ever experience with your commuting and the weather in New York any serious issues with cracking or other maintenance problems?
I've been lucky that way. I never had an instrument crack. I did own an A clarinet many years ago, one of the old ones with the curved octave key. It was an old buffet, and it had a crack in it that somebody put a strip of nail polish on the crack. And it has had a great sound, I thought. So even then, you were subject to changes. But I was very lucky. I never had an instrument that cracked while I owned it.
That's amazing. In over 60 years, you never had an instrument crack? So what's your maintenance routine then? Do you think that there's just so much value in playing so much that the wood just gets used to that level of humidity, or?
Well, we have a good level of humidity in New York, for one thing. In some places, I guess, if you go where it's extremely dry or extremely high, there are problems. But I would say there's more problems with the reeds in those situations than there is with the instruments.
So what's your maintenance like for the wood? Do you humidify it at all, or just?
No, just stay in the case when it's not being played. I would say you dry it out. I mean, you pull a swab through it and the sockets, get the water out of the sockets. People do all kinds of things with humidity. They put their reed case and they put the sponges in their reed case or something. I never did any of that, and I'll tell you why. Because I played so much, it never got dry.
Well, that's amazing. And too, like the swab you're using, is it like a magic swab, or how did you get
No. In the old days, the only swab that was used was one made of chamois in the old days. But then the handkerchief swabs came in, and then there's even different fabrics that are used. I would say the most important thing with the swab is that it doesn't get stuck in the instrument. I take the mouthpiece off and I swab from the bell up. So you have to make sure that the cord or string is long enough to go through an A clarinet from the bottom of the bell through the barrel.
You know, it's funny. I actually asked a debate question in the clarinet community one time about this, and you wouldn't believe, or maybe you would believe, the number of responses and sort of mythology around which way one should swab.
Oh yeah, well yeah, that's true. And some people over swab, like they overdo everything, and past a certain point, it's not necessary.
How often do you replace your clarinets? Like, are you the kind of person who thinks that they get blown out, or do you just?
If you use them a lot for years, it can lose a little resistance. And I'd say for me, I've had, of course, many clarinets over the years. I would say 8 to 10 years would be a good time to get another B-flat clarinet. A little longer with the A clarinets. So
that implies that you don't go for a match set then? You just replace them when it's time?
Well, I've been pretty lucky. I've had good instruments over the years. I used Buffet, and it was the instrument of choice as when I was a young student. I have had good fortune with them, and they're a reputable, venerable company, a lot of history.
Do you have any advice for getting rid of old instruments, or did you keep them all? Or, I mean, I'm replacing my clarinet for the first time in 20 years right now, and it's hard to let go of the old one.
Well, if you have something that you really loved, you keep it. You keep it, even if you don't use it. Maybe you take it out at Christmas or something and play carols.
Did you keep a set of backup clarinets always, or?
Yes, I always had it. I always had 2 sets going. Sometimes I even had an extra.
What do you think the most clarinets you ever had at one time was?
Oh, I had 3 sets. I had an E-flat clarinet, and I guess that was it.
Not a huge number I was expecting. It was more like 20 or 50.
Well, I have an antique clarinet. I have a very old, early 20th century clarinet, A. Robert, which is a French make. I think they went out of business in 1940. They started, of course, many years before. It rattles like pitched castanets, but it's a nice old instrument. The look of it is so classic,
Love that. Thanks for sharing all that information about your instruments. That's super fascinating. I had a couple just extra questions at the end that I wish I'd asked you last time. So the first one is, there was an oboist recently talking about how they had repertoire envy, and sometimes they wished composers wrote more for them. And, we're lucky as clarinetists, but there still are some that we wish would have written for clarinet. So who's a composer that you wish would have written more extensively for our instrument?
Probably Haydn, for one. He did use clarinets in the last symphonies, but they're very, very, rudimentary parts. And I would say also maybe perhaps some of the late Baroque people.
Is there any more contemporary composer as well who you?
Well, I think there are a lot of interesting, good composers today that write challenging music, that explore different devices, certainly with clarinet, pieces that you hear that strain the possibilities, all the different tricks with harmonics and quarter tones and extreme high register things in a very soft dynamic sometimes that are challenging. They do challenge the players, but they seem to handle it pretty well today, because the players of today have the mindset to envision these pieces.
Absolutely. So my next question is, which unfinished symphony do you most wish the composer completed?
Well, Mahler 10th, for one. It would have been interesting to see if he had finished that 10th symphony. I think he did the first movement and a fragment of a following movement. Strauss wrote a wonderful oboe concerto. I wish he would have written maybe one for the clarinet. And he did, of course, that duet concertina with bassoon, which is a great piece. We've got a great repertoire on clarinet. A lot of good solo works.
Yeah, we are so lucky. I definitely did not identify with the oboist who was talking about that stuff, where we've been so lucky as an instrument.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot of good pieces. And they're not only as solo pieces, they're in chamber music also, of course.
So this last question here, this is actually not music related at all. It's just something I was wondering. So it doesn't sound like you had a lot of days off throughout your career, but when you did have days off in the city, New York is so vibrant, there's so much going on. What would you do?
Well, we did go to performances. We went to all the good museums. We managed to attend things, different plays and perhaps and some Broadway. We also had a busy time when we were off because we were avid boaters and we had a small cruising boat, and we spend 4 to 6 weeks in the summer cruising the East Coast and places like Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod. So it added a little something to what we were normally doing.
What would be your favorite spot to go for like a good lunch?
We like Uncle Nick's on Ninth Avenue.
All right, next time I go there, I'm going to Uncle Nick's for lunch. Maybe you'll join me.
Why not?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I've got just a quick 5 extra questions here, maybe 7. These are exclusively for the people who help support the podcast. It's called the lightning round. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
It's like a game show. So what is something that throughout your career you did every day that you felt contributed most to your success?
Well, I played every day.
Every single day, even if you were sick?
Yes. In fact, I've performed sick.
What is your all-time favorite clarinet accessory?
Dutch Rush.
Ah, the reed rush.
Right, reed rush. That was the vital ingredient because clarinet players didn't use a knife to work on reeds in those days. Only oboe and bassoon players did.
If you could relive any aspect of your career, either because you loved it so much or because you wish you could improve it, which would it be and why?
Well, what I miss the most is the challenge of the new.
What is one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were much younger?
I'm glad I didn't know it.
Ignorance is bliss?
Absolutely.
What piece of music or album changed your life irreversibly?
Well, as a kid, I think the most exciting clarinet performance I heard was the 1937 recording of Kell with the Bush Quartet playing the Brahms Quintet. I was so excited by it because it was absolutely like improvised. It was so free, and the first movement had about 12 different tempi. It was exciting. It was a fantasy, and that opened up a lot of thoughts that one didn't get when they heard four square playing. I heard an old 78s. It was made in 1937. And that was an exciting discovery, I would say.
Do you still have that 78?
It's on a CD now. I think it'll always be around.
What was the performance or achievement that you mentioned also came to mind?
Well, I mean, the most thrilling performances for me, there were a lot, but I would say being soloist with the Philharmonic, and well, of course, doing the Nielsen Concerto, and then the Corigliano Concerto. And of course, I did Debussy Rhapsody earlier on a recording, and as a soloist, and I did Copland Concerto many times, and recorded it finally with Leonard Bernstein at his last appearance with the New York Philharmonic in October of 1989. And I was his last soloist that year, and then I played with him again months later at Christmas in the East Berlin for the Freedom Concerts of the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven. I joined the International Orchestra. I was invited. That was an exciting moment. Also, playing it the Nielsen Concerto 4 or 5 times, and then recording it a few days later on the stage. It was exciting too because. It just brought back everything, and then that Corigliano Concerto was a monster. I'll tell you, that was a big piece. It was very lucky. It was the actual world premiere of that in '77 is in the set of the historic broadcasts of the Philharmonic. which includes a lot of really famous soloists, everybody from Heifetz and people like that, and Rubinstein, and really it was one of my greatest honors.
Yeah, I mean, even half the achievements would be amazing. That the fact that you lived through all this is just incredible. So, congratulations on such an incredible career.
Well, I thank you, Sean. It's amazing how fast it went, but I have a good memory bank, and I draw upon it, just for good memories and exciting stuff, and the fact that I played with so many good colleagues, interesting players, great players, with 450 colleagues in the Philharmonic over those years, which is another. I didn't make that number up. The archives told me, and with all those music directors, and hundreds of guests, and every one of them came with a repertoire they really wanted to do, and that's the point. That's why a lot of those concerts were so marvelous.
You mentioned your memory. What is your favorite way to look back on those memories? Do you listen to recordings or flip through pictures or?
Oh, sure, multi things. I have a lot of memorabilia. I have the recordings. I have a lot of stuff. I was very lucky. Mitchell Estrin wrote a book, a biography of me. It took him, over a period of 4.5, 5 years, and very happy that he did that. And it's something I'm happy about. And Jerry Bunke did a wonderful set of 5 CDs. They're all live performances over a long span of years of solo pieces and chamber music that I played over the years in many different venues. So that is exciting, and the fact that I've done a lot of stuff like that. Early recording of the contrasts of Bartok with Bela Bartok's son Peter, who was the engineer, and so for me, Library of Congress concerts with the Juilliard Quartet, fun stuff actually.
So many things, and I want to come back to that biography in just a minute here, but before we move on, what was your very first ever musical memory?
Well, I heard a guy playing the clarinet in the backyard of our apartment building there. I guess he was playing klezmer music, and people would throw him coins down wrapped in pieces of newspaper. And that was the first clarinet player I really listened to. I would say I don't know if that was an influence or not, but I saw they were throwing him coins.
That's super interesting because I don't know that would happen today. I think that
no, it couldn't happen today. We were in Paris not so long ago, where there was a fellow playing the clarinet in the courtyard near one of the museums, and he was pretty darn good, let me tell you. And we had a fast chat while we were on the line to get in, and so they're still playing this, and they play in the subways there too.
Man, you never know who's watching. You might just be busking in Paris one day, and Stanley Drucker could walk by.
That's right.
I'm super intimidated to do anything now.
Well, I think some of those guys are good, but I would say that early on, I heard certain players, play certain pieces that you really listen to.
So the last question I've got here is, what is one book that you think everyone should read, or what's your favorite book?
Reading is a luxury that one, has to develop because when you're playing all the rehearsals I played and travel to and from those and concerts, I'll tell you, I really enjoyed 2 of the books that Eric Leinsdorf wrote. They had a lot of spice in them about players and composers. And one of them is called Eric Leinsdorf on Music, and the other one is called Cadenza. Those 2, I enjoy, history. I've learned a little bit about the history of the Philharmonic going back to 1842. There have been, at this point, 5 books at various times in their history that have been written about the Philharmonic.
So what did you do during all those commuting hours? And if you did you read or?
Yeah, sure. I looked at music, and I also read. I also caught up on the daily news, and just to fill the time up, the ride was always an hour. a little longer or a little shorter sometimes. And then, of course, the subway ride was very fast, even to the Carnegie Hall days when I played in Carnegie Hall for those first 12 years I was in the Philharmonic. They hadn't built Lincoln Center yet. And that was also the same kind of a commute, except I had to go to 57th Street instead of 65th. Carnegie Hall was interesting. It was a lively place with a lot of studios in the tower, and the hall, was so historic and venerable hall. Tchaikovsky conducted there. Imagine.
Absolutely, that's amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, at the premiere of the hall, he conducted his March Solennel. It's a march, a small march, at the opening. The hall had history in its walls. It was marvelous.
There's so much history as you walk around New York. It's just such an amazing city. So.
Oh yeah, it's got everything starts there. Really, I think.
Yeah, totally. So before we wrap up today, I really want to talk to you about your new biography that's out.
Mitchell Estrin, who was a student of mine at Juilliard for a bunch of years. He got his degree there, and he started interviewing me with his tape recorder, and over a period of time, and it all came together. I mean, it's really great. The book is pretty complete. Almost everything of my recollections are in it. There may be maybe one or two things I didn't have in it, but it's got a great index so that things can be found quickly. And I love the picture they used for the cover. It was one taken in Seoul on a tour, and early morning. And I call it my James Bond picture. It looks like a cloak and dagger picture. Anyway, I talk about equipment, about the conductors I played with, some of the students who worked with me. They wrote some nice words or interesting stuff. And some of the conductors also are quoted and John Coriano, wrote a concerto for me and Lenny. He did the foreword, and his father, of course, was concertmaster when I joined. Also, John Coriano.
So, is this book now publicly available?
It is available. It's published by Carl Fisher. It can be gotten there, and it's also on Amazon.
Well, this is now on my clarinettist wish list. I'm going to have to definitely check that out right away.
It's called Stanley Drucker, Clarinet Master, a biography by Mitchell Estrin.
Definitely an apt title.
I was thrilled that it came to be, and we didn't find any typos yet, so I'm lucky in that area. And I'm also I want to praise the work of Jerry Bunke with Digital Force, who did the heritage collection of these recordings, and to Mike Getson, who saved a lot of these old tapes that he collected over the years, with concerts that were every kind of a venue you can imagine, from a hole in the wall to a cathedral. It's amazing how they turned out. I'm very proud of a lot of that stuff.
So the Heritage Collection, yeah, we talked about that last time on the podcast, episode 63. You can check that out if you're listening. And check out the show notes for today's episode for a special birthday coupon code where you can get a discount on that as a thank you for listening to Clarinet. So thank you so much, Stanley, for coming on the show.
Sean, thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And we share the interest. We share the same interests.
Absolutely. The clarinet.
Absolutely. The clarinet.
Clarinet. Yeah. Well, your career is such an inspiration, and I really want to congratulate not only all of your accomplishments, but also your 90th birthday. That's a very special occasion.
It's a scary number, but look, there's no alternative. Keep up the good work. Great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Clarinet Podcast. Show notes for this and all other episodes can be found at clarinet.com. While you're there, don't forget to join our email newsletter for free updates, exclusive offers, and a chance to win giveaways. Guest requests, listener feedback, and comments can be sent to feedback@clarinet.com. Special thank you to our season sponsor, Dario Woodwinds. Don't forget to check out their new show, Don't Blow It, on Instagram, and also try a box of their new Reserve Clarinet reeds next time you're at the music store. The show is also brought to you by Chamber Music Northwest. With over $20,000 in prizes and world-class guest artists and vendors, their upcoming clarinet celebration and competition is an event that you don't want to miss. Learn more at cmnw.org. Hosting for Clarinet is sponsored by Bakun and their new line of Lumiere clarinets, barrels, and bells. Get 10% off your next accessory purchase by using code Clarinet at bakunmusical.com. This program was produced and hosted by me, Sean Perrin, in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Music performed by Michael Lowenstern. Debate episodes co-hosted by Andrew Morrow. Audio editing by Brian Chappelles. And copy editing by Megan Taylor. You can support the ongoing production of this independently produced program by donating to our Patreon at clarinet.com/support. Supporters get early access to extended ad-free regular podcasts and exclusive access to patron-only episodes and live events. That's all for now. Be sure to tune in next time for more of what's new and neat with clarinet with the neatest people in the industry on the Clarinet Podcast.